It being 8:59 a.m., we'll get started. Call this meeting out of recess. For those in the room and also for those that are participating remotely, I want to remind you to silence all cell phones and other electronic devices. For those in the room, the restrooms are out here in the hallway. Follow CSA staff instruction in the case of emergency. I want to welcome Alicia Fernandez to her interview today. And we're going to turn the time over to Mr. Dawson for the standard 5 questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Fernandez, I'm going to ask you 5 standard questions that the applicant review panel has requested that each applicant respond to. Are you ready?
Yes.
First question. What skills and attributes should all commissioners possess? What skills or competencies should the commission possess collectively? Of the skills, attributes, and competencies that each commissioner should possess, which do you possess? In summary, how will you contribute to the success of the commission?
Okay, thank you. In terms of the skills and attributes that all commissioners should possess, the first one would be to be a good listener. I think a big majority of what we'll be doing is to listen from the community members in terms of what their values, hopes for their communities are. Also, a major skill would be to be open to differing opinions. We have to realize that we're just one of millions of people in California, and everyone has differing opinions. We come from different backgrounds, so we have to be open to that. We have to be open to what their positions are, what their values are, and we also have to be empathetic to their. They're very passionate about their opinions, their wants, their desires, their goals. And we need to ensure equity as well, equality, but also equity. Also, the commissioners, you should have an analytical capacity. I don't want to say background because I would hope that everybody does, but you will be reviewing different data, maps, numbers from the census, whatever other data you gain, and also you need to be resourceful to not only rely on the information you get, but in today's world with technology, we're able to actually reach out to other states to see how they do things. We're able to get other information. So we just need to be resourceful. Not only that, also resourceful with people that we know and people that we may not know, but we'll get to know if we just reach out and become better informed. We also need to be leaders at times and sometimes not leaders. We need to know when we need to lead and when we need to let others lead. Also, we need to be team players. Obviously, we're a group of 14. We can't all be the leaders. We're all part of a team. We're one of 14, and we're all there to serve each other, not one person to serve, not 13 to serve one. Communication, we need to be good communicators, both verbally and in writing. I'm assuming we'll be writing some documents at the end of this. And we also need to be emotional. We all come with different values, as I mentioned, and we need to be open to that. We need to not hold so strong to whatever. If our opinions do differ, then our opinions differ. It doesn't mean that it's good or bad. It just means that it's different. So we just need to be unemotional. What would also be helpful is have interviewing skills. We'll be asking lots of questions, I'm hoping. So we need to be able to attempt to develop rapport when we can, use different investigative skills if you can. I've been an investigator for many years. And with that, you approach each interview differently based on the person, based on the information that you have, and you just need to know which method to use. The capacity to learn. You also need to be able to learn, not think that you know it all. We don't all know it all. We don't even know close to it all. So we just need to be able to learn, take in new information, be able to interpret that information. Organizational skills. You definitely need organizational skills. As I mentioned earlier, we'll be reviewing lots of documents, and we need to make sure that we're on task and that we have all the information that we need. And obviously it needs to be organized in some way, because then that leads to better communication as well. And integrity, we do need to be honest people. We need to move forward in the best interests of all, not just of myself, but we need to be honest about it. And one thing that I like is I hope that all of us can at least laugh once in a while. Let's not take ourselves so seriously, but this is a serious venture. But we also need to be able to maybe sit back once in a while and just reflect. And in terms of the other part of the question was, let's see, which skills do I possess? Well, of course I possess all of them. I'm not going to tell you any skills and attributes that I wouldn't possess. But I don't say that lightly. As my application has shown, as I mentioned earlier, as I mentioned in my application as well as earlier, I've been an auditor. And many of you are auditors as well. So as you know, you have to read education. Well, for me, I had to read education code, penal code, government code sections, and from there you develop your audit plan or your investigative plan. You collect your evidence, your resources, and then if you're an auditor, you actually go out and you actually audit the specific program area. And from there, you're talking with people, you're learning processes, you're trying to understand what their internal controls are. As an investigator, we're out there collecting evidence, be it video recordings, be it surveillance, be it documentation that's at the facilities. And then after that, you conduct your interviews. And as I mentioned earlier, being able to interview and adjust your style to whoever you're interviewing is very important. Sometimes you have to be the soft person and just talk lightly and kind of just let them tell their story. Other times you just have to present them with the facts, and it's more of a here's what we have, and let them respond. So you really just need to be able to determine what type of approach you're going to use. And in terms of being a good listener, that's what we do as an investigator, as an auditor. You do need to listen because, again, we don't know it all. And I feel just also my background as a school board member for the last 13, 14 years, I can't remember. But that's a group of 7, all of us from different areas coming together for the common goal of our students. And fortunately, we've been rather successful. We have all educated each other on our different communities. We've been open to that, which has been a benefit to not only the board, but also the students that we serve. So in terms of, that's how I feel that my skills and my experience and my attributes will contribute to this commission.
Thank you. Question 2. Work on the commission requires members of different political backgrounds to work together. Since the 2010 commission was selected and formed, the American political conversation has become increasingly polarized, whether in the press, on social media, and even in our own families. What characteristics do you possess, and what characteristics should your fellow commissioners possess that will protect against hyperpartisanship? What will you do to ensure that the work of the commission is not seen as polarized or hyperpartisan, and avoid perceptions of political bias and conflict?
In terms of the characteristics that I possess, which I feel all commissioners should also possess in order to protect against the hyperpartisanship, is we need to be open. We need to be able to take in new information, and we need to be respectful of one another. We need to also be professional and leave our biases at home. We all have biases, and if someone says they don't have biases, well, I guess I'd have to question their integrity. But we have to acknowledge that. And with that, and it's okay because we have our biases. It's based on our families, how our environment, our experiences. But what we need to do is we need to recognize that that's the first step. And then we also need to be able to set that aside and be open to what the 14 commissioners have to say as well as what the public has to say. It's amazing when you actually sit back and listen and really try to take everything in, that at some point in time you think that you're educating someone on whatever the topic may be, but at the end of the day, if you listen, they're actually educating you. So in my opinion, that's what we really need to be as commissioners. We really need to be open and not come with any preset plans or opinions or whatever we think the end game is going to be. We don't know what the end game is going to be. Well, we know what the end game is going to be is redrawing the district lines, but we need to listen. And that's, as I mentioned earlier, number one, I do listen. That has been part of the jobs that I've held, is having to listen and having to take input from others. And I actually enjoy that. I actually enjoy listening to different opinions, because I only know what I know. And I only know what I know based on my experiences. And listening to others and their experiences is beneficial not only to me, but to everyone, and respecting that. And in terms of what I would ensure that is not seen as polarized, again, I would be open. I would hope. I mean, you are bringing 14 strangers together, so there's going to take some time for everyone to get to know each other and respect each other. But I would hope at some point in time we will all respect each other, get along, and then when we do make decisions, we're making decisions as a united front, not as a Democrat or Republican or a different party. It's as the commission, nonpartisan commission is how I would see it. Because the last thing you want to do is to have some of the commissioners go against whatever the ultimate decision is. So granted, is that Pollyanna approach? Yes, it is a Pollyanna approach. Is that realistic? Maybe it's not realistic, but that's what I'm hoping for. I'm hoping that we can all get to a point where we can all respect each other's values, opinions, and decisions, that we support them all. Is it going to be 100% support? Probably not, but I just hope at the end of the day we do. And I'm just going to bring up that we did recently redraw the district lines for our school district. Excuse me. And we're made up of 5 rural communities, farming communities, and they brought forward the census data, obviously, and they brought forward the maps. And I wasn't in agreement with the initial way they had drawn the plans. So we asked them to go back because some of the areas, rural areas, weren't being represented as we felt they should be. So they went back, and during that time I also researched some education code to ensure that we were doing the right, following the correct process. And at the end of the day, they came back with other plans that I felt that were more appropriate and represented our communities better, and the rest of the board did as well. It's a member of 7. And at the end of the day, did I completely agree with how they were drawn? No, I did not. But at the end of the day, did I support it? Yes, because that's what our responsibility is per the education code, and also what was best for the students. So again, being able to put your own values and your own wants aside for the betterment of everyone is what our goal is. So that's how I'm hoping that we will be able to work together and not have any biases or conflict at the end. But we may have conflict, but that's something that happens in any group setting.
Thank you. Question 3. What is the greatest problem the commission could encounter, and what actions would you take to avoid or respond to this problem?
It was kind of interesting because coming from a law enforcement background, my initial thought was being threatened. So I actually have 2. I hope that's okay. One of them would be threatened because what I've seen, not only from the people I interview, but from communities, and you see it in the media and you see it firsthand, is that, as I mentioned earlier, people are very passionate. They're very passionate about what they feel, their culture, their community, and if they feel that that's threatened, they may also threaten you as a result of that. And being in law enforcement, I don't take threats lightly. There is a process for that. You contact your local law enforcement agency, you ask them to conduct a threat assessment. I'm hoping it doesn't get to that point, but we do need to prepare for that. And we shouldn't just shrug it off if someone makes a threatening comment. I think we need to take it seriously. But actually, so that's one of them. And the other thing is conflict. If there's conflict amongst the commissioners, against the members. And with that, I addressed that in number 2 is hopefully, the main thing with conflict is you have to address it. And many people, I I see it where I work. I'm sure you have all seen it where you work, is they don't like to address conflict. But that's the one thing you need to do right away is address the conflict, try to bring the parties together. If it's 2 people, 4 people, whatever the case may be, try to understand where the conflict resides and try to help them work through it. Because the last thing you want is for there to be conflict among the 14, because we are on, I don't remember the timelines, but I know it's pretty strict timelines, and we don't have time to get derailed for too long. So in terms of actions I would take, what actions we would take to respond is I would work with those that have conflict, and the conflict could be with me as well. So if it's with me as well, then I need to sit back and I need to do some self-reflection, and I need to determine why am I having such a big issue with whatever either the other commissioner, or whatever the issue is. And then I also need to be a good listener, which is what I mentioned in the first one, is I really need to sit back and listen, because again, I don't know it all. And they obviously have differing opinions, and it's not to say that it's a wrong opinion, it just means it's a different opinion, and I need to be able to take that in, be open to that, and then realize at the end of the day, we have a goal. And so what's the best process to take to get to that goal? And that is to resolve whatever conflicts we have internally. I think that's it. I think just understanding that what our mandate is and what our timeframes are, and to just continue to move towards that effort and resolve any conflicts that we have.
Thank you. Question 4. If you are selected, you will be one of 14 members of the commission, which is charged with working together to create maps of the new districts. Please describe a situation where you had to work collaboratively with others on a project to achieve a common goal. Tell us the goal of the project, what your role in the group was, and how the group worked through any conflicts that arose. What lessons would you take from this group experience to the commission if selected?
I think in terms of the experience, one of the projects that I worked on when I worked at CalPERS, I was on the investment accounting and reconciliation project team. I was the team leader, so I worked directly for the project managers. I had a project manager that was on the information technology side, and then one that was on the business side. And so what this project was, as CalPERS, the public employee retirement system, they had never had a reconciliation system, a system that reconciled their investments to their accounting, to their custodial bank, which was external, then to their accounting. So for me as a CalPERS member, that was very important to be able to reconcile that information. So we never had it. And they made a decision to implement a system. And with that, as part of the project team, I had to work with our external stakeholders, which were our custodian bank. And then we also hired a consultant that was actually going to implement the system. And by meaning implement, it was a package that we were, buying from a company, but we had to implement it into our CalPERS infrastructure, which had to go into our IT area, which also had to have access to investment operations, as well as our fiscal services division, which actually did the accounting piece of it. And again, this is something new that had never been established. So with that, it was challenging because those were 5 different groups that we had to work with to try to make this happen. And we did have tight timelines. We had a year to implement it with the budget. And in terms of what we did is every area, the investment office, fiscal services, the IT, as well as our contractors, they all identified users that would be part of our team. And so those users they had their regular work assignments, plus they were on this project, which, as you can imagine, can be challenging because their main focus was either investments, or it was IT area, or it was doing the accounting for the rest of the agency. So with that, in terms of some of the issues that arose were their dedication to the project. And so what would happen is as a team leader, if there were conflicts or there were issues that needed to be addressed, I would be the one to address them. initially with those at the lowest level if possible, which is how I've always tried to work. And then we also had weekly meetings that had where we met with all of the team members, and then also had a timeline. It was a strict timeline. It was like by week. And at that point, when we would meet, we'd come up, there would be a list of issues that we had. So at that point, we would address the issues in terms of, okay, who's responsible for addressing it, and also listening to what the issues were. And like I said, there were conflicts, though. But at the end of the day, it was successful. It was actually, at that point, CalPERS, I think, had 6 different projects at the same time, and we were the only project that came in on time. And we were the only project that came in under budget, which, if you've ever worked for this state, coming in under budget is quite an accomplishment. And at the end, the users did buy into it, and they did see that it was going to be beneficial for them. It did make their life a little bit easier. But going through the process, it was painful because change is hard for many people. And when you're trying to do both jobs, you're trying to be on the project and also your normal work. We had to be sensitive to that as the project management team, which we tried to be as much as we could, but we also had time frames. So just continually reaching out and ensuring they had the resources they needed in terms of moving forward. Then also towards the end, ensuring that the consultant had transferred all of the information to our staff, be it IT, accounting, or the investment office, that they were properly trained and they felt empowered that they were going to be able to implement this successfully and they could work through it. It actually ended up working well. In terms of what lessons I would take from this group is to remain focused and to, we know what our timeline is. So just continue to maintain that timeline. And like I said, if there's conflicts, definitely work through those as soon as possible. Don't let those drag, because the longer you let them drag and you don't address them, the bigger they become. It's easier to solve when they're not as big. And so that's what I would take. I would just take the going back and just listening, appreciating what we're all trying to do, appreciating that we do have a common goal, and then just reminding everyone to sit back, take a deep breath, and remember this is our goal, and it's nothing personal. It's just this is what our mandate is. And I think that's it. I think you just, like with the commissioners, with the 14 of us, we just really need to take time to learn about each other and understand our positions and respect that information, but then move forward with the common goal.
Thank you. Question 5. A considerable amount of the Commission's work will involve meeting with people from all over California who come from very different backgrounds and a wide variety of perspectives. If you are selected as a Commissioner, what skills and attributes will make you effective at interacting with people from different backgrounds and who have a variety of perspectives? What experiences have you had that will help you be effective at understanding and appreciating people and communities of different backgrounds and who have a variety of perspectives?
Okay. First of all, I am first generation, so not only am I culturally an American, I'm also culturally Mexican, which I think is the best of both worlds. But also being in that position, sometimes you also feel like you don't belong because you're kind of in this middle ground. You're not to the left, you're not to the right, you're just kind of in the middle somewhere. And I feel that for me, that has been very helpful to be empathetic to others and that have come to this country and that have different cultures, different experiences, because it is important to me. And I feel that because it's important to me, I know that's important to them. So I respect that. And actually I welcome and I'm open to learning new cultures, new ways, new experiences. I think it just makes me a better person, makes me better informed. Oops, I just kind of lost my train of thought for a second, but I'll get back on my train of thought. And in terms of, and not only, and I'm just talking about cultural differences. I mean, we have geographical differences. It's every type of difference that you could think of. But at the end of the day, we go back to listening and appreciating each other's differences. And in terms of what was it, the experiences you've had? Okay, so the experience that I had, so I've talked about being a special agent, and as a special agent, also as an auditor, you collect all this information, all this evidence prior to interviewing your witnesses, and we call them witnesses and subjects, so as a special agent. So there has been numerous times when I have gone in, I have my information, I have my evidence, I have my documentation, and I think I know what the answer is going to be, or I think I know this person is guilty or not guilty, whatever the case may be. But so many times I've gone into the interview and they've actually educated me because I haven't taken into consideration the human aspect of it, their experiences, what their mindset was of why they did what they did. Does it explain it? It explains it. Does it make it right? Sometimes it does make it right. Sometimes it doesn't make it right. But at the end of the day, just having that experience as an agent just leads me to believe no matter how much evidence I have, sometimes when you go into that interview, it can just be kind of blown out of the window because they're able to justify it and explain their reasonings for doing a certain action. And like I said, it may still be incorrect or misconduct as we see it, or it might be justified. And then also, the other thing, when I ran for school board, as I mentioned earlier, it's 5 small communities, farming communities, and when I ran against the incumbent, it was a true grassroots effort where we actually got the electoral rolls, and we actually went out to every home and we knocked on their doors, and we, for me, it was probably one of the best experiences, which it's probably one of the hardest experiences, but it was also one of the best experiences because, in my mind, I thought, oh, we're all farming communities. We should all have the same goals, positions, interests. But boy, I was so wrong. I actually appreciated getting to know people from other communities, and you would think they're just small communities. I should have already known them. I don't know them. I tend to go towards the big city where the other communities are away from the big city. So when we were walking the districts, as we would say it, when we were walking the districts, we felt we were educating them on, this is what we need for the district. This is blah, blah, blah. And at the end of the day, they ended up educating us in terms of what their wants were, what their opinions were. And at the end of the day, we had more in common in terms of what we wanted for our students and for our communities. So in a sense, even in small communities, small farming communities where you wouldn't think there's much diversity, there really is diversity. It can be the diversity just from one street to the next street. And it's just being aware of that and being open to that. And I feel that the experience I have had in my life has opened me up to the diversity and being able to be open and appreciate the diverse individuals that we have in the state.
Thank you. We'll now go to panel questions. Each panel member will have 20 minutes to ask his or her questions. We'll start with the chair, Mr. Belknap.
Good morning, Mr. Fernandez. For a combined total of 14 years, you have worked at either the Inspector General or with the Department of Corrections in an investigatory role. How have you exercised impartiality in these roles?
In terms, specifically, I'll talk about the, as a special agent. As a special agent, our investigative reports are unbiased. And so what that means is that we don't form an opinion. What we do is we collect the information, we collect our evidence, we collect, excuse me, we collect our evidence, our documentation. I've already talked about surveillance or whatever could be police reports. So we collect all of our evidence and then we start interviewing the witnesses. Obviously, we already have allegations ahead of time, so that's what we're investigating, are the allegations that have been vetted through our central intake unit. And with that, we go into our interviews with the witnesses. And from that, we either interview more witnesses or then we go to the subject. And when we interview the subject, obviously we have all the information that we've collected so far. And at that point, we don't make our decision that the person is guilty or not guilty. What we do is we confront them with the information that we have. We confront them with the allegation that we have, and then from there, obviously we have follow-up questions and whatever else triggers from that. If there's more information that the subject has brought forward, then at that point in time, after the interview, then we go back and we research that information. So what we attempt to do, and what I hope we do, is we provide a well-balanced report that has all the information that we have. And like I mentioned, if the subject brings up additional information, we also research that and we draft our investigation report. And as I mentioned earlier, we do not draw opinions. We provide that information in a report and we submit it to the hiring authority. And so the hiring authority at that point, they are the ones that are the decision makers in terms of whether or not allegations are sustained or not sustained. And they also work with excuse me, they also work with a vertical advocate, which is an attorney for our office. And we also work with the attorneys on our office, the vertical advocates as well. And we also work with the Office of Inspector General. And they also have an attorney sometimes on our cases. And so we ensure that the information that we have is complete. It is unbiased, but it is what it is. I mean, when I say unbiased, is I didn't come up with that information. I didn't. I wasn't the one that initially that created it. I just gathered what was available at the time, and so that's how I ensure that. I think you said unbiased, correct?
I said impartial, but it's
Partial.
similar.
I'm sorry, impartial. Yes, and for the Office of Inspector General's office, you asked for that too, correct?
It's fine. I think the process is similar. What I want you to go into now is if you could describe a particular experience at either places in an investigatory role where you had to set aside your personal views to conduct an investigation in a fair and impartial manner.
I can't go into specific details. I'm sure you can appreciate that because they are investigations. So I'll go more in generalities if that's okay. It's hopefully.
Yes.
Fine.
Okay.
Okay. I think for me, the ones where it was more challenging, it would be more challenging for me to set aside my personal opinions, is more as when you get into the equal employment opportunity area where we have quite a few investigations that are in that realm, and more of the sexual harassment side of it. So that's challenging to interview someone if you have all of this information and it appears that the subject has done this, conducted himself inappropriately, and it can be difficult to go into an interview and interview someone knowing that they've done this to a female or a male, either way. But I have been able to do that. I go in there and I just, okay, so here's the information you have, and I'm not accusatory towards them. I want them to explain their position. I ask them questions, they give me their responses, and I don't show emotion. I ask follow-up questions. So actually, I don't think I show emotion. I shouldn't say that for sure, but I don't believe I show emotions or bias in terms of whether or not I feel they have committed the misconduct or not. I treat them with respect, which everyone deserves, regardless of what they may or may not have done. I allow them to provide whatever information they can. If they have other witnesses, if they have, oftentimes they do have information to contrary in terms of what's been alleged. So of course, after that, I do go research that as well, and I may interview other people as appropriate to discount or to show their point of, to validate their position. So I'm thinking that's probably the one area where it would probably be the most difficult for me to set aside my biases. But again, at the end of the day, my position is to come in and present an impartial report, and that's what I do.
All right, thank you. So in your discussion today, you talked about how we all have biases and we need to be aware of them. And you just talked about one where you have difficulty or
I have biases, not difficulty.
right, a bias against people who sexually harass. I think most of us share that. That's a bias. What other biases do you feel like you have, and what have you done or what would you do to make sure they don't affect the work of the commission?
Oh my goodness, that's a good question. So I'm trying to think of what other biases. I'm sure I have many. I'm just kind of at a. You stumped me right now, but I'll get to it. Let me think. Biases, probably. I'll give you this because I grew up poor. So probably my bias growing up was that everyone that had money, I mean, they had it all. They controlled everything. They were. I mean, I just had my own opinions of people with money and the advantages they had. But as I became educated, I went to school, went to college, got to know more people that were in the higher socioeconomic arena than me. I realized that no, they don't have it made. They have problems too. Everything's not solved. They have issues just like us. And there's many great attributes that we all have. And so I think maybe that was kind of like an eye-opening thing was, we have to, it's easy to make preconceived, oh my gosh, it's easy to, oh gosh, I just kind of, generalities. It's easy to make generalities about people. And like I mentioned earlier, when I walked the school districts and I got to know people, then I realized that, yes, we all are different. And we do have our biases, and I did have my bias against those that had money. But at the end of the day, they were unjustified because I really needed to, and hopefully that's what I've learned, is that I really need to get to know people before I make decisions about whether or not I'm going to like them or not like them, or how I'm going to classify them.
All right, thank you. So where did you grow up, and how did your upbringing affect the way you view the world?
So where I grew up was in, I live in a small farming community outside of Sacramento, California. My dad was a farm worker. So as you can imagine, I'm one of 8 children, number 7. And to say we were poor is probably being generous. So we obviously did come up in a disadvantage in terms of income. But to be honest with you, I was actually talking to my son the other day, and I said, you know what? I didn't even realize how poor we were until I went to college. And then I realized how poor we were, because I was blessed. I mean, it is a small farming community, and we do have, there is this big disparate between the farm workers and then the farmers, obviously. But I can honestly say I don't remember, and maybe I was just blind to it, but I don't remember their being treated differently because of that. So I think I was blessed where I had a good group of friends, a good mixture of people. And I think that's what I've learned, is that just because we're different doesn't mean we can't get along and we can't find common ground. Okay, what was your question again?
Oh, you've answered it.
Did I? Okay.
You currently live in Clarksburg. Is that the same town you were referring to where you grew up?
I'm sorry.
What town specifically did you grow up in?
Oh, so I grew up initially. My first few years was in Cortland, California, which is on the Delta, and then Clarksburg, which is where I currently live. I moved away for a while, and then I came back.
Okay,
so I like the small town.
That leads to my next question: is have you lived in or worked in other regions of California?
No, I have. I mean, I've worked in other regions in terms of, as an auditor, I traveled throughout the state to different school districts. As an investigator as a deputy inspector general and also as a special agent, I traveled to different parts of California to the different correctional facilities. But in terms of actually living somewhere else permanently, it's mainly been in the Sacramento area, Sacramento, Elk Grove, Delta community. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah. In your work travels, do you feel like they were extensive enough and you stayed there long enough that you got a good sense of the areas you were in, or were they mostly focused, get the investigation done and get back home?
I would say they were probably mainly focused on, get the job done. But I will say in all of in most of my jobs, I actually did get to know the personnel, the staff that worked there when I would talk to them about their processes, especially with auditing, because you really need to know the internal controls and the processes. And I do feel I went out of my way to get to know what their processes were. And I actually provided information on how they could improve those internal control processes, because I didn't want anything to be a surprise at the end. But in terms of getting to know them, I mean, I feel I did, like I mentioned earlier, I mean, I could travel throughout the whole state, I would think. And at the end of the day, we're all trying to get to the same place, which means, trying to do our jobs. We're trying to do our jobs the best we can. We all have, obviously, families that we have to feed, even if it is just ourselves. So we do have, there's so many more commonalities than differences, I believe, because at the end of the day, we do have survival instincts. We do have values and morals. Could be at different ranges, but if we try hard enough, we can find commonalities with most people.
All right, thank you. You answered one of my questions. I was going to ask you about how being a school board of trustee has increased your appreciation for California's diversity, but I feel like you've answered that today in your testimony. What I want to give you is an opportunity to discuss any other volunteer work experience that increased your appreciation for California's diversity.
Any volunteer? Well, the volunteer that I do is being on the board, obviously. And then other than that, my focus has been on education. When I do volunteer at the schools. I hope to start doing that a little bit more often now, but I probably did that for about a good 8 years. And my favorite was going into kindergarten classes and reading to children reading and math to children that did not speak English. So it was actually probably one of the most rewarding experiences, because by the start of the school year, they don't know any English at all. And by the end of the year, they know English. They're singing, they're talking, everything's English to them. So for me, it was just so rewarding to just see the difference 1 year can make, not even 1 year, 8 months can make, and just providing the one-on-one attention that people need. So that's been very rewarding. And like I said, most of the English learners were socioeconomically disadvantaged. And then other volunteered as a soccer coach in Rancho Cordova. So it's an area that also is not, is low socioeconomically. So that was actually kind of fun. It was getting to know, I think it was 6 girls that I knew 2 of them from before, but I didn't know 4 of them, and just their diverse backgrounds in terms of, again, they're just trying to make I guess they're at the point where I believe I was early on in my childhood, where they're just trying to make ends meet. So in my opinion, so my volunteer has mainly been focused on areas that they need volunteers versus excess of volunteers. And only because I really do like and enjoy meeting other cultures, other diversities, other ethnic groups. I'm open to that, and I actually enjoy it. It makes me a better person.
All right, thank you. Madam Secretary, time check.
Yes, 4 minutes, 4 seconds remaining.
All right, thank you. Can you walk us through an investigation or other analysis you performed that you believe demonstrate the strength of your analytical skills?
Can it be a special project, not necessarily an investigation? Would that
Yeah.
work?
Yes.
Okay. Actually, it did end up to be an investigation. So there was our prison law office, excuse me, had conducted a review of High Desert State Prison in Susanville. And they issued this report that had over 670 findings. And they tasked me for resolving those 70 findings. So with that is, in terms of my analytical skills, I had to develop a spread. I didn't have to. I developed a spreadsheet. I had to actually initially what I had to do was review the report, and then I had to decipher the 70 allegations that were in there. And so with that, I developed a spreadsheet that I used to track every allegation. And with the allegation, I would also identify if there was a subject that was identified, if there were any witnesses identified, who the complainant was, whose responsibility it would be to follow up. And so with that, with weekly, I worked with, well, actually daily, I would work with the institution because they were mainly the ones that had to conduct inquiry works. And so every inquiry that they conducted on each different allegation, I actually went there and I reviewed it to ensure that it was complete, that they had done a thorough job. And if needed, we would open up investigations. And with that, I would also follow the investigations to make sure that they were done appropriately. And then from there, I would track to see where once the investigations were sent back to the hiring authority, to see if discipline was issued. And then also with that, I had to work, like I mentioned, I had to work with High Desert State Prison. I had to work with my own management because this was the first type of its report that we had received. And then also I worked with our internal investigators or special agents. And I also we hired an external consultant that was independent. So I worked with them too. And with the external consultant myself, we had to come to consensus in terms of when each allegation was resolved. So at the end of it was a long process. It took us about 9 months, I believe, 8 months. But at the end of the process, the external contractor was satisfied, which meant the prison law office was satisfied. Our agency was satisfied. So for me, that kind of exemplifies I believe you said analytical and being able to interpret information and then look at law also, and then look at our own operations manuals, our different, because some of the alleged misconduct was not misconduct, because if you look at our policies and procedures, which that's what I had to do too, they were within policy. So that was part of it too. So for me, I think that just shows all the different resources I had to use in order to resolve these 70 allegations. And at the same time, I was still doing my other regular assignment. So I was continuing to process investigations also.
All right, thank you. I have no further questions at this time. I'll turn the time over to Mr. Coe.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, Ms. Fernandez. Thank you for taking the time to speak with us today.
Thank you.
I also want to apologize. I don't know if you guys can hear noise. Somebody is apparently jackhammering concrete outside my house. Lived here for over a decade. That's literally never happened. And of course, now that I'm trying to conduct this meeting here, somebody jackhammering concrete outside making a lot of noise. So hopefully that doesn't come across to everybody else. Ms. Fernandez, I'd like to start with asking you about some of your volunteer roles you describe in your application. And most of those appear to be geared towards working with young people in some capacity. And I'd like to know what motivates you to focus your volunteer work on the youth of your community.
Because that's an interesting question, because I've actually thought of that myself too. And it's like, why do I concentrate so much on the youth? I think because, and if you look on my application, I've worked for the Department of Corrections and Office of Inspector General, probably 17 plus years. So I see what the end effect is in terms of institutions and inmates and parolees. And I honestly feel that the children are a key to have so they don't end up in our institutions or facilities. And I feel that I've been blessed. I have the resources that I can help and the children and maybe a little bit of a mentor for them, to let them know, hey, I was a farm worker's daughter as well. I mean, English is my second language. And for me, I feel that they need more mentors, hopefully, that are positive and that will support their aspirations of either, continuing on to college or to go into a trade school or whatever the case may be. But when you're struggling, when you're poor, oftentimes education is not your priority, nor should it be, because you're trying to just put food on the table. And so for me to concentrate on the youth, I think that's the key. That's the key to hopefully them making better decisions in the future. And it's actually kind of neat, because I did coach volleyball, and so now it's kind of fun to see that some of the girls that I coached are coming back to be coaches as well. So it's nice to see them give back as well. So that's why I concentrate on the youth.
Thank you. I'd like to talk about your impartiality essay for a moment. And in that essay, you mentioned having changed your position a few times after listening to the input of others. And I'm wondering if you can give us a specific example of a time where you changed your position after gathering additional input.
Probably, I'm going to get some marks in my mouth, right? Probably when I talked earlier about in the school district, when we recently redrew the district boundaries. Our district doesn't have to do that because we vote at large. So you don't have to redraw your district boundaries every 10 years. And I actually continued to fight that, because there was a community member that kept asking us to do it. And I felt, and the rest of the board also felt, that we weren't being, and we were being fair across the district. And it was recently where somebody really sat down and explained why they felt it should be, and gave me more insight as to what their positions were. And at that point, that's when I decided that, yeah, you're right. We do need to redraw the boundaries to be more reflective of our population, our census numbers. And so I guess that was probably one of the major times when I've changed my decision and my mindset to do something different that I wasn't set to do.
Thank you. I'd like to, it's a nice segue into another question I wanted to ask you about your service on the school board, where they recently redrew the school board trustee districts. And I'd like you to talk more specifically about what your role was in that. And were the trustees drawing their own boundaries? How was that working?
Oh, no. Okay, so once we made a decision and voted, in an open forum, that we agreed to move forward with this, then we consulted with, oh goodness, I think it's our county office of education. I can't remember, but they're the ones that actually, they took our information, our census information, as well as our district boundary overall and how the census split up. And they're the ones that came forward, and they presented initially 3 different scenarios. They would show what our current district boundaries are, and then 3 other options. And at that point, when they initially came in with the 3 other options, I was not happy with how they had drawn a couple of those. So they actually went back and they came up with a couple of other options. And at the end of the day, we unanimously voted for the one that I felt was more reflective of the communities, so that each community could maintain its own trustee.
Was community input was gathered and considered during this effort?
All of our meetings are open, and I actually don't remember receiving any community input. But again, our meeting agendas are posted 72 hours prior to the meetings. Anyone and everyone is open to come to our meetings, and you do have to understand that it is a rural area. It's probably over 50 miles, and each community, probably my community, maybe has 1,000 residents. I'm not sure. So rarely do we receive, do we have community members attend our meetings.
I see. And to get a little bit more technical, what data was used for this process, and was there any use of mapping softwares?
I'm not sure if there were mapping softwares because, again, we're not the ones that actually created the boundary lines. In terms of the data that was used, it was the census data. So this would have been the census data for 2010, because obviously 2020 hasn't been done yet. So we use the census data, and also obviously the map of the district in terms of how that population was distributed amongst the district. And like I mentioned, there are 7 trustees. So then divided that area into 7 to try to come up. I think they tried to make every trustee area approximately maybe 2,000 residents, something like that.
Okay, thank you. Changing subjects a little bit to your essay on appreciation for California's diversity. You said in there, and I think you mentioned something similar earlier during the interview, but in the essay you said, "I know how difficult it is to feel as if you belong," and I'm wondering if you can expand on that a little bit.
What was it? I know how difficult it is
to feel as if you belong.
Wow. That was a long time ago. Let me try to remember. I'm kidding. So I believe what I'm referring to is it's difficult. It's difficult if you already feel like I mentioned earlier, English is my second language. So if you already feel that you're different, then it is hard to feel like you belong. And part of that too is people want to belong. So getting from, excuse me, I probably need water. Getting from point A to point B, you probably need another step. You probably need a point C. So it's important. I think it's important for most people to feel like they belong. And when you tie this into the what we're going to be tasked with here is not only feeling that you belong, but hearing that you're being heard and that you're being understood. And that's probably how it ties into being on the commission. Is I do know that people want to be heard, and people are unique, and people culturally and different. Religiously and socioeconomically, they want to be heard. They want to be represented, and I believe that's what I was trying to say. I'd have to read the whole thing to see in the context of what that one phrase came out of. But I think that's just wanting to belong, and I think that's important with this commission. Is people want to feel that they were heard, and maybe that will increase their participation in the future with the future elections.
Okay, thank you.
Your question.
No, it did, and actually you covered a follow-up question that I was going to ask you afterwards, and so we already got that one covered as well. So thank you. So I want to talk about communities of interest for a moment, and one of the biggest tasks that the commission is going to have to go through is to identify communities of interest all across the state. And some of those communities may be easier to identify than others. They're more engaged, they're more obvious, and in one way or another. And some of them might be harder to find. They're less engaged, or they don't normally want to be found for a variety of reasons. As a commissioner, how would you go about identifying communities of interest, particularly paying close attention to kind of inadvertently overlooking some of those harder to find communities?
Oh my goodness, that's a good question. I'm pretty sure we can't do grassroots like I did with the district when I ran for district, going door to door. But actually, if you go to some of the, we were just talking about this recently. if you go to some of the churches, churches are also community areas. There could be different organizations or different groups. You could try that as well. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, having the internet access, I mean, you can Google everything, anything now. Not in the old days when you had to actually do door to door. But I would, and like you mentioned, also there's some people that just don't want to be engaged or don't have the time to be engaged, and you have to respect that as well. You can't impose yourself too much, because then that works opposite of what your goal is trying to be. But I would just try to reach out if we know. Your law enforcement agencies. It's a good source in terms of different areas that may not be as represented or as engaged. So at that point in time, you can work with law enforcement or with the church or with different groups, and more than likely they would be the pulse, and they could tell you, hey, talk to this person, they're kind of who everyone looks up to. So maybe doing a little bit more effort of trying to just not go to the obvious, is what you mentioned earlier. And I'm not afraid to do that. I mean, I did that when I ran for the school board. I actually went door to door and actually did door to door, as well as a mail postal campaign. And now you have the internet access too. So I would try to engage something like that. And we actually just recently did something with the school board where we're trying to decide whether or not we're going to move forward with a bond and with the bond measure. And we hired a firm that actually went out and did calls for us, had a questionnaire that they went through, and just randomly made calls, telephone calls, both cellular phone, landlines, and also via the internet. So that's another option that you could do as well. It's whatever, and that's a good point. And we see that in the school too, is like you always have the same people that volunteer to do this or that give opinions on this, which aren't the majority. It's just maybe, a handful of people, and they're kind of trying to make the decisions for all. And that's, as you pointed out, that's not appropriate. So, definitely try to engage more, either telephone, to seek out law enforcement as well, or some other community organizations, even sports related. That's youth sports. Not everybody. A lot of people get their kids into sports. So that's probably another area you could go to also, but just try to think outside the box.
So in that work, you might encounter some communities that are concerned about engaging, not necessarily that they're against it. They might like to, but they have concerns for one reason or another in getting involved with government bodies or with engaging and providing the perspectives of their concerns. But since input from as many communities as possible is important for the commission to do its work, how could the commission make some of those communities feel more comfortable with coming forward and sharing their perspectives?
I think trying to develop, like I mentioned earlier, even those communities, they do have spokespeople. So my initial instinct would be to try to develop a rapport with that's whoever those spokespeople are. And really try to educate them and explain to them what this is in terms of how it can help them in the future. I mean, you see a lot of the commercials now on the census and how that's going to help with the schools, but it can be the same type of marketing and information sharing that we could do, is to just, again, go back, listen to what the spokespeople have to say, and try to adjust to that and try to figure out how you can break that barrier and earn their trust. And that's really what you want to try to do, is earn their trust. And that doesn't mean 14 of us go, and maybe just 1 or 2 of us go, so it's not so overwhelming to them. So just try to find out through your other sources, what's really driving them. What can we bring to the table that will hopefully help them understand that we really do want them to be engaged. We really do want to know what they want, what their values are, what their goals are. So that's kind of how I would approach it.
Thank you. If you were to be appointed to the role, to the commission, which aspects of that role of commissioner do you think you would enjoy the most? And conversely, which aspects of the role of commissioner do you think might cause you to struggle a little bit?
Quick time check. We have 3 minutes, 50 seconds remaining.
Thank you.
With the role of the commissioner? I'm sorry. Do I answer that? I don't answer that.
No, you can. The secretary is just letting us know we have just under 4 minutes left before we have to pass on the time to the other person. So did you hear the question or do you need me to repeat it?
Okay. And so just so I understand, in terms of the roles of the commissioner, you're kind of going in and out. So I just want to make sure that I did hear you.
Okay. I'll repeat the question. Hopefully it comes through clear this time. The question was, if you were to be appointed, which aspects of the role of commissioner do you think you would enjoy the most? And conversely, which aspects do you think might cause you to struggle a little bit?
The roles of the commissioner. Now, if I had that in front of me, that'd be great. So I think the analytical side of it, I think would probably be my positive side. I'm very resourceful. I'm very analytical minded. Gosh, I'm kind of a data nerd. So that part I would probably be very comfortable with. In terms of what I wouldn't be comfortable with, I'm just trying to think right now. I'm actually not sure right now which role I would not be comfortable with, because I think that many of the roles that the commissioner has, I've had also on the school board. So I'm trying to think of on the school board would have been the most difficult. I mean, the school board's different because we've had to make budget cuts. So obviously those were the most difficult for me to make because I never liked to cut anything in schools, but it was necessary at the time. So I actually I can't think of what role I would not be as comfortable with right now.
Okay. Mr. Chair, no further questions at this time.
All right, thank you, Mr. Coe. We'll turn the time over to Ms. Dickinson.
Thank you, Mr. Belknap. Good morning, Ms. Fernandez. Thank you for meeting with us today.
Thank you.
So many of my questions have been asked, but in your response to question 2, you may have touched on this already, but you stated that we all have our biases and need to recognize that and set that aside. So what are your biases and what will you do to ensure those biases don't affect your decisions as a commissioner should you be selected?
Okay, in terms of the biases, let's see. I think probably a bias that I would have, and I mentioned it earlier, I think with Mr. Coe, is how you normally have the same people coming to board meetings and giving opinions after about like the 3rd or 4th time, you kind of become numb to that and you tend to exclude it, or you could. And so I think with me, I just have to be very, very cognizant of not dismissing anyone in terms of what their opinion or what their conversation and what they want to communicate to us. And I think that's it. It's probably just not dismissing what someone has to say, because for them it is true and something that they believe. And I just have to continue to remind myself of that it's just like me. I speak what I feel emotional about, what I value, what's important to me. And it would be the same with being a commissioner. You have to be open to that. You have to listen. You have to take them all equally, everyone's comments equally.
Thank you. So one of the things the last commission noted was there were instances in which they felt that people were presenting themselves as members of community, or they were speaking on behalf of members of community, when actually they may have had ulterior motives of political bias. With your background in investigations, what skill set do you have that you think would help the commission in identifying this, and how would you handle these types of things?
Okay. And that we get that too. I mean, like you said, as a special agent and also being on the district as we have on the board is we have members coming up saying many people feel this way. And so what I've done in the past and what I do also as an investigator is, again, I welcome what their position is. I welcome the information they have, excuse me. But at the end of the day, it's just one person giving their opinion. And that's what I try to remind myself of. And also in terms of whatever they are presenting, be it as a special agent or be it on the school board, I go back and I research that, and I do as much investigative type work as I can to, one, understand that person better if they are someone that maybe does have, like you said, maybe politically has a different political position or whatever the case may be. I go back and try to learn as much as I can about that person and maybe what their past practice has been. And as an agent, that's not a subject in or a witness in, I went back and validated that information. And again, at the end of the day, it's one person coming forward with their information. And yes, they often, or not often, sometimes they do come forward and they try to appear that they are representing the community. But again, unless the community is there with them, then it's one person, one opinion, and go back and do as much validation and research as you can on their positions.
Thank you. So you're the trustee of the school board, and you talked about running a grassroots campaign for that. When you were running that campaign, what did you learn about the communities in your area and their needs that you may not have already known?
What's interesting, well, I mean, one of them was, at the end of the day, we did have the same goals. We did want our kids to be educated. We did want our kids to have the best facilities, the best teachers, be equitable. That I guess I assumed, but I think what I learned most of that was the area I represent is on the north end, and on the south end is, like I mentioned earlier, probably 30 miles away, something like that. And it was actually interesting because we always felt on the north end and on the south end is where the district office is located. And so on the north end, we always felt that the south end schools were getting all of the resources and they got everything they wanted, and you know, all of the programs and sports and different types of classes and had the better teachers, all of that. And then when I went to actually walk that area, they felt that the north area was the one that had the best school, the best program, the best services, everything. So I think what I learned is that because no one's talking to each other, if that's a good way to put it, you're operating in a silo. You're operating just in your own little area, and you're not realizing that you're all feeling the same way. And I think that's probably what I learned, was that as a district, we really didn't do a very good job of communicating with all of our areas. And one thing that was changed when I got on the school board is before all of the board meetings were held at one end of the district. And then, so what we did is we started holding the meetings at the different schools. So now the district meetings were being rotated to the different sites, and we actually had a few more community members come, but we also realized, or I realized, how important communication is and listening. I mean, you really need to hear what they're saying. And just by moving the district meetings to different communities, that was a way of communication, of not only us communicating out to the public in our communities, but also for the community members to come forward with any concerns they have, because we always have an open forum, a public comment period, and they can also comment during the different agenda items. So I think that's probably like the the thing that I found most interesting is that each end felt like the other end was the golden child, and they felt like the stepchild. So now we do a better job of communicating, being very more transparent on our decisions, more vocal in communicating that out to our community areas.
Thank you. So you've talked a little bit about the experiences of when the school district went through the redistricting process. What do you learn during that process that you think will assist with the work of the commission should you be selected?
Excuse me. I think what I learned most through that process was that it is important for to draw the boundaries so that you do have areas that are either communities that are inclusive and representative of themselves. I also learned through that process that it doesn't have to be equally divided in terms of 2000, 2000, 2000, 2000. It can be drawn differently based on how, based on maybe the identities of certain communities or whatever the case may be. So I learned those two things, which before I thought it has to be just equally drawn within a few, couple hundred numbers. But I learned that it is important to ensure that each community or area, if possible, can be represented singly, and then also that you do have flexibility in how those boundaries are drawn.
Thank you. If you're selected as one of the first 8 commissioners, which are selected randomly, you would be tasked with selecting the next 6. What would you be looking for in those individuals?
Oh my goodness. Well, I think what I would look at first is if I'm, one of the 8, I would see what the 8 of us are. Hopefully I have a chance to meet the 8. I'm hoping I will. And then to see what our skill sets are and what maybe our strengths are. And then in terms of selecting the next 6, I would like to select 6 that could bring some other strong skill sets into the group, if that makes sense. So that collaboratively we have a strong commission where we have a breadth of different skills and knowledge and abilities. Because having 14 of the same type of people isn't necessarily good, because you really need to have you need to have an array of the different tasks, because we can't all be experts in everything. Because at certain points in time, some of us will be leaders, but then we'll step back and not be leaders because that's not my area of expertise. So somebody else will step up for that. So that's probably what I would look. So the 6 that would complement our team, not necessarily overlap it in terms of what we already have with our skills and abilities, but that would complement and just make us a stronger, diverse group of commissioners.
Thank you. You've talked a couple of times about people needing to be leaders and also knowing when to step back and let someone else be leaders. What can the commission do early on to build that team atmosphere where they know when each person knows when they need to step out?
Can you repeat that just one more time? I'm sorry, it kind of cut out for a little. I'm sorry, my internet connection is probably not the best, so I apologize for that.
That's okay. What can the commissioners do early on to build that team atmosphere in which each of the commissioners knows or understands when maybe they should step back or maybe they should be in the lead?
Okay, so I think as the commissioners early on, I think we really do need to get to know each other. We need to get to know our backgrounds. We need to get to know our strengths and our weaknesses. as I do now on the school board, I'm just going to give you an example. Is there's 7 of us, and fiscally, that's really kind of my area. So everyone kind of looks to me to make sure that do the numbers look good? Is everything good? But then when it comes to the contract side of it, another board member, that's his strength. So I definitely step back at that point, and he's the one that's going to really dive into that to make sure that all the questions are asked, and we're going in that direction appropriately. And then there's another one that's an expert in the construction side of it. So at that point in time, the rest of us step back and let them ask the questions. Not that we don't have questions also, but they definitely speak the lingo and have more expertise in that area. So that's what I would feel as as 14 commissioners, we're all going to have strengths. But there's also going to be areas where we're not as strong as in terms of what I would consider an expert. And at that point in time, we have to trust each other, and we have to have respect for each other. That if, for example, they're going to say, okay, Alicia, you take if it's a fiscal, why don't you lead that effort? They have to have trust in that person that they're going to come through and do their due diligence to ensure that that area is covered. So at that point in time, I'll step up. Not to say everybody steps back, because everybody still has opportunity to ask questions, to look into it. But I think it's just more of getting to know each other and having the trust and respect for each other, that is your area of expertise. And yeah, you can take the lead on that one, because we can't all be leaders. One, it's exhausting, and 2, if you're all leaders, it's going to be very hard to move forward. So we just all have to have the same, not the same mindset. We have to have that mindset that we won't know it all. There's going to be some areas where just may not be as comfortable as we would like in terms of whatever we're analyzing or going into, and it's okay. It's okay, because there's 14 of us, and we can support each other. And we just have different roles at different times, and it's fluid. And that's what we need to understand, that it's always fluid and it's changing. It could be changing from one minute to the next. So my goal would be for us to meet and get to know each other and get to know our backgrounds first, in terms of what we all bring to the table, and what has been successful in the past for all of us, what we've learned, and then just, like I said, just respect each other.
Thank you very much. Mr. Belknap, I don't have any further questions at this point.
Okay, thank you. We'll turn the time over to Mr. Dawson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, Ms. Fernandez. Thanks for being here. I was going through your application, and as you know, the supplemental application is quite lengthy and requires each applicant to list out, all their relationships to determine whether or not there's a conflict of interest. And a name jumped out at me. You list as a sibling a Margarita Fernandez.
I do list that.
Is this the same Margarita Fernandez who's an employee of the California State Auditor's Office?
Yes, it is.
All right, thank you.
Yes, it is. I shouldn't say it. Don't tell her I said it.
I think this might be news to the panel, but just in the interest of, full transparency and fairness, I wanted to say on the record that, of course, this is not a disqualifying a relationship. That you absolutely have, should be on the panel if you're qualified, and it shouldn't influence the decision of the panel one way or the other. So thank you for that. Mm-hmm. If I could move on to the question, you talked about your service on the school district. It's the River Delta Unified School District?
Yes.
And that comprises several different cities and towns, correct?
Yes, cities, towns, and 3 counties.
3 counties, okay.
Yes.
So that's a bit unusual, isn't it?
Yes, very unusual.
And is it mostly rural kids?
Yes, it is. They're all farming communities on the Delta.
Do you think, as a Delta resident, the Delta is obviously a very important part of California, but do you think it tends to be overlooked by the coastal communities in Sacramento?
Tend to be overlooked. I would say it may be overlooked just because of the pure numbers of it. I mean, when you're talking about, there's 2,000 students in our district versus Sacramento City Unified has, I can't remember how many children they have, but they have probably over 20,000. Elk Grove has over 40,000, I believe, something like that. And to be honest with you, in terms of politics, the school district's probably as far as I've gotten. I haven't really gotten into the outside of my community because it's kept me busy enough. Just trying to ensure that our kids are educated and it's equitable amongst all of our students. But I can see where it could be overlooked because it is in numbers wise, and that's what appears to dictate is numbers wise, we aren't that many. But collectively, if you look up and down the state with different farmers, collectively, we are. So I feel in that sense, they are represented on the farming side of it because they do collaborate statewide.
Thank you. So the three counties are Sacramento, Yolo, and Solano, is that right?
Yes.
So I don't know if you looked at the composition of the 2010 commission, but the farthest north that any commissioner represented, a county represented, was Yolo. Assuming you were selected for the 2020, and again, Yolo County was the farthest north, would you be looking to fill representation from a farther north county than Yolo?
Oh, would I? Can you like reword that?
Well, so Miss Dickinson asked you about if you were on the first 8 and looking for representation that you would find for the next 6. Would the geographic diversity of representing the northern part of California be part of that consideration?
Oh, like if for the next 6, I'd be looking for that. I guess I'm not understanding your question. If Yolo County, if I'm going to be the Yolo County and theoretically I'm representing the rest of the northern state, is that correct?
Well, my question was just more general about the importance of representing all of California, and is it sufficient that someone from Yolo County represent all of Northern California?
If that's going to be my role, then at that point, I better start doing some traveling because, in my opinion, it'd be important for me to go visit those communities that are north of me. I have gone to some of them. Unfortunately, it's been where prisons are located, but I would make more of an effort to make sure that I either went out to visit more of the northern communities, or even online, or whatever I could do to try to find out what their wants and desires and goals are. Because if I'm going to represent the North, then I got to make sure that I talk to and get as much information as I can so I can be educated in that area.
All right.
Because I'm not going to just talk about me. I'm not going to just talk about my community. It needs to be all.
All right. Thank you. Mr. Chair, I have no further questions. If the panel has any further questions.
Mr. Cody, you have any follow-up questions?
No follow-up questions.
Ms. Dickinson?
I don't have any follow-up questions.
I don't have any follow-up questions either, and I want to affirm something that our legal counsel said, is we've received no communication from Margarita or anybody about your application, and that was the first time I ever heard of that. So we've evaluated your application, and we will evaluate your interview completely free of any communication from your sister or anyone about that. So that is the first time we heard of that.
Thank you. Madam Secretary, how much time is remaining?
Yes, 2 minutes, 5 seconds remaining.
All right, thank you. Ms. Fernandez, with the time remaining, I'd like to offer you the opportunity to make a closing statement to the panel, if you wish.
I'm sorry, to what?
Oh, if you would like to make a closing statement or remarks to the panel.
Okay. I just want to make one comment because you brought up Margarita. She did not even know I applied. So, I mean, this is something that I've kind of just kept to myself. Really, it's just a handful of people that know that I'm applying for this, the 3 people that I asked for letters of reference, and my immediate family. That's pretty much it. So I just want to, when I do things, I kind of do them solo in terms of if it's something for me personally. The less people that know, I think for me is the better. So I just want to throw that out there. Also, I just want to thank you for this opportunity. I know this is challenging times for all of us, and I appreciate you continuing to hold the interviews and move forward with this process. I realize that we are under tight time frames, and you need to get through this process, but I appreciate allowing this process to go through and continue. And I understand that it's a difficult job for you, and hopefully what I've presented today, as well as in my application, has shown you that I would be a good addition to the commission.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate you being with us this morning. We're going to go into recess now and be back at 10:44 a.m.